You're smart, you've done the work. So why do people with less knowledge seem to get more recognition, more influence, more power, while you stay stuck in your head? Well, after years in both academia and business, I've seen this pattern again and again. The most intelligent people stay powerless, not from lack of effort, but because of three invisible solutions. And once you see through them, you'll gain a form of power and influence that those other people never will, because they just won't be able to mentally grasp it. So let's break the first illusion: a narrow definition of truth and meaning. Whether you like it or not, your way of thinking and your way of perceiving the world have been largely shaped and directed by your history and culture. Now, this isn't an argument for historical or cultural determinism. It's simply an acknowledgement based on a large body of work in social cognitive theory and decision theory that your beliefs, your ideas, and your very thoughts are heavily influenced by those who came before you and your cultural context. Consider for a moment that in many ancient cultures, there was no distinct concept of the color blue. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean that ancient people couldn't see the color blue. It's simply that they didn't carve it out into a special and separate category like we moderns do. And so their conceptual framework was different in this respect. And so think about how your current perception of the world is fairly arbitrary. If you had grown up in a different culture or time period, you might believe wildly different things than you do now. But what's the purpose of pointing this out? Is it to make some bold claim about how all truth is culturally relative? Absolutely not. Instead, the purpose of this is to help prepare you to broaden your understanding of truth and thereby expand the possibilities of your action and execution. In order to do this, you have to first understand the history of your own ideas, of where those come from. And especially if you're a native English speaker watching this, your ideas of truth and meaning stem, at least indirectly, from a philosophical tradition called analytic philosophy, which has come to shape fields such as physics, chemistry, and biology, as well as the social sciences. And whether you're aware of it or not, this tradition has probably come to influence your thinking and perception in some way. Thinkers in this field, thinkers such as A.J. Ayer, Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein, John Searle, and many, many others, they sought to resolve the traditional problems of philosophy by banishing the ambiguities of language in favor of systems based on formal logic and set theory. And generally speaking, they viewed language as a barometer of truth and meaning. In other words, language constitutes the limits of reality. Everything that is real and that exists can be expressed in language, and therefore anything that can't be expressed using some sort of language simply doesn't exist. But then the analytic philosophers ran into a bit of a problem. To illustrate this problem, let me ask you a simple question. How do you define truth? It's pretty difficult, right? I mean, think about it. Any definition you give for the word truth is gonna somehow have to be simply a restatement or a synonym for the word itself, and therefore will always be question-begging or circular. But the analytic philosopher Alfred Tarski came up with a brilliant solution, what he termed a semantic conception of truth, which was based on what he called satisfaction conditions. And he achieved this in two steps. One, he used a construct in logic called meta-language. You can think of a meta-language as a language that refers to an object language, and you can think of an object language roughly as the representation of the language we speak. Two, he established conditions that must be satisfied in order for a statement to be true. And from that, voila, we can now call this formalization truth without incurring any circularity. And of course, I'm oversimplifying Tarski's theory here, but what if I told you it's this narrow definition of truth that's holding you back? What if I told you there is such a thing as extra-linguistic truth and meaning, or truth and meaning outside of language or logic, and that once discovered can lead you on a path of greater self-discovery and self-mastery? Well, in order to fully understand what I mean, we first have to explore the second illusion here: unawareness of the four levels of reality. Now, before we understand what I mean by levels of reality and why they're so important, let's first follow up on the assertion I made before that there is indeed such a thing as extra-linguistic truth and meaning. And we can understand how this is possible by going all the way back to Aristotle and two key ideas central to his own philosophy. Namely, one, pros hen equivocation, and two, the essence-accident distinction. So let's break these down in a simple way. Have you ever heard someone use the word rational in any of the following ways? I'm so rational I can solve any logic puzzle quickly. The patient is not rational and therefore cannot consent to surgery. The rational answer would be to help that person in need. Well, can you detect that we're using the word rational here in slightly different ways? Yes, in fact, we are, even if just slightly. Well, all of these uses, despite their differences or what Aristotle called their accidents, point to a single central meaning of the word, or in other words, what Aristotle called an essence. And without going into nitty-gritty detail here, this essence-accident distinction indeed can be formalized in set theoretical notation and is not simply some airy-fairy concept. Okay, so then what does this have to do with truth or meaning? Well, just as with the word rationality, if we want to find the essence of truth, we have to examine its pros hen equivocation. Or in other words, we have to examine all the possible ways we use the terms truth and meaning in our language. Otherwise, even according to the strict criteria set out within the analytic tradition, we will not have captured accurate denotations of these terms. And upon even a simple investigation into the cognitive sciences, social sciences, and even our everyday experience, it becomes exceedingly clear that the words truth and meaning are often used to refer to experiences we have that fall outside of what language can capture. For instance, have you ever heard a great piece of music or a painting and felt it conveyed some truth or meaning? Have you ever thought about the meaning of life? Well, even if you haven't personally, have you heard people at least use these terms? Well, if so, then they must mean something or refer to something. And it's by understanding what they refer to that we gain greater clarity in our thinking, our actions, and our relations to the world. But in order to understand what this truth and meaning is and where it resides, we now have to understand the 4 levels of reality. 1, subjective reality. 2, intersubjective reality. 3, situated objective reality. And 4, objective reality. Now, you might disagree with my use of distinctions here or believe they're arbitrary or frivolous. You're free to do so. As we've seen before, we can make almost infinite distinctions with respect to colors, or we can group them into extremely limited categories, all according to our practical purposes. And we could do the same with respect to different aspects of reality, or collapse them all into one, yet again, according to our purposes. And so at least for this video, the distinctions have their usefulness, as you'll see. So let's start with subjective reality. We can think of this as the reality you experience in and of itself. When you listen to music, see a piece of art, or watch a sunset, you draw some individual meaning from it. Meaning that is based on neural networks of associations in your brain or mind. Meaning that is the result of complex interactions between you, your perceptions, and your environment over time. This is the type of reality the philosopher Husserl, as well as many philosophers who have come after him, has analyzed. It's the world of what has come to be called phenomenology, or the area of philosophy that investigates our raw, unfiltered, or often pre-intellectual experience. When you experience a beautiful sunset after a day spent with a loved one, can it be said that there is some truth to this experience? A truth that can't be reduced to a mathematical model? I'll leave that as an open question for you to answer. Then there's level 2 here. Intersubjective reality. The philosopher Jürgen Habermas is perhaps one who has written and spoken the most on this aspect of reality. As Habermas explains, citing the psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development, this is the level of reality in which social meaning is made. And here's the thing. Social meaning is most definitely constructed, but just because this meaning is constructed, does it make this meaning in some way any less legitimate than Tarski's metalinguistic account of meaning? Our next level, level 3, is the situated objective. Now, what belongs to the situated objective, and why isn't it simply objective, full stop? Well, this is the realm of mathematics, formal logic, and probability. As the great mathematician Kurt Gödel and even Tarski himself established, there is no system that can justify itself. As these thinkers admitted, the laws of logic, math, and probability rest upon axioms which themselves cannot be proved. However, this is where many other thinkers would fall into a sort of epistemological relativism, concluding that if these fundamental axioms themselves cannot be proved, then all knowledge is relative, all knowledge is arbitrary. Emphatically, this is not the case at all. In fact, I believe we are obliged to accept at least some version of Tarski's definition of truth. We're obliged to accept that the laws of logic, math, and probability are true. It's simply that they are true in the domain within which they operate. They don't extend to all truth and meaning. They capture instead a sliver of it. And this is similar to what the great yet underrated and little-known philosopher Ernst Cassirer famously argued. And so I believe Cassirer would agree with the next distinction I'll offer here: the objective. There is some objective reality out there, yet we can't experience it or access it. And this isn't some kind of mystical thinking. The cognitive sciences and the study of animal perception have made this abundantly clear. Everything in the world has a smell, for instance. Yet we would need the faculties of a dog to experience it. Ultraviolet light has a color, yet we would need the faculties of a bumblebee to see it. And sound waves, in a sense, actually look like something, except we would require the faculties of a bat to perceive it. It's well established that our brain fabricates our sense of 3 dimensions based on what is called prediction error through our interactions with the environment. Otherwise, how would it be possible to perceive in 3 dimensions from a retinal interaction with light that is merely 2-dimensional? The reality is that our perception of reality is a product of what our brain has adapted to for the purpose of survival, not truth. So in a sense, the objective reality, which we could think of as all possible experiences of reality all at once, this is something that is impossible for us to perceive, at least for now. And so now that our understanding of truth and meaning has, I hope, expanded in new ways, we can finally confront our third illusion: normative attitude versus normative truth. Now, the idea of normativity, or more directly the study of the concept of value, this is an idea I've formally written and published on academically. Now, no offense to you highly intellectual people out there, but here's the thing about you guys. You can often be a pessimistic bunch. And to illustrate this, I'll draw upon some exchanges I've had with self-styled intellectuals over the years. So I've had people tell me things like, love is just some chemical response in your brain, or we're all just made up of atoms and particles. And even as I sit here with my dog in the room next to me, I could imagine the same people telling me, you just love your dog because of the release of certain chemicals in your brain and the accident of natural selection that caused humans and dogs to mutualistically evolve. Or your dog and you are just a bunch of particles and your minds are epiphenomenally instantiated entities that might have some experiences, but which will ultimately fade away anyway. And so here's where we have to make a vital distinction between normative truth versus normative attitude. Okay, so we can't deny the empirical facts here, right? My dog and I are made of particles, and those particles will eventually scatter into randomness due to entropy. However, note that the aforementioned comments are not purely empirical facts. They are instead empirical facts imbued with judgment. In my academically published work, I've laid out a theory of value that I believe establishes normative statements as subject to truth conditions. That is, I've proved that statements of value can be true or false. However, over the years, I've come to realize, painfully so, that in some very real and specific sense, this doesn't matter. And it's precisely because of this type of situation. Not too long ago, I had an exchange with a viewer in the comments section in which you were asserting that, quote, the problem with morality is that we have no reason to care about it, unquote. And while the statement can logically be shown to be false, importantly, the fact that it can be shown to be false does not in turn give this viewer an impetus to care. In other words, truth or falsehood alone does not make someone care. And this is probably one of the most powerful lessons you can learn when it comes to interacting with and having meaningful connections with people. Returning to our first level of reality for a moment, that of subjective reality, this viewer and I have what I can describe only as a difference in phenomenological focus. He or she has decided that certain empirical facts will determine some phenomenological imbuing of these states of affairs, such that they cause him or her to quite literally perceive these states of affairs as a certain way. In short, the viewer and I perceive a difference of meaning. Regardless of normative truth, the viewer, as well as the hypothetical person who made those previous comments about my dog, the perception of love and so on, they all possess a certain normative attitude. And as far as I can tell, an attitude can have no truth value. It can't be true or false. It's simply a decision. It's simply a state of mind. As the existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre has stated, freedom is what we do with what's been done to us. And I believe this statement powerfully illustrates the distinction between normative truth and normative attitude. For we can't choose the composition of reality. the laws of physics or that we're made of particles. We can't choose that some interaction of chemicals in our brains produces a sensation we call love. We didn't choose our family, we didn't choose where we were born, and so on. But I make the choice to imbue phenomena with meaning. Who cares what the cause is? Does it really matter? And why? And we all are free to make that choice. And whatever choice we make, it will instantly, and quite literally, radically change our reality. But the most important question is, what's your choice? If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact not only on your own life, but also on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.